The flight lands at 1 p.m. Can someone pick me up? I stared at my phone, the group text to my family hanging in digital silence for longer than it should have. My hand trembled slightly, whether from the medication or the anxiety, I couldn't tell anymore. The Cleveland airport bustled around me, travelers rushing to reunions while I sat alone, 3 weeks post-op from a surgery that had given me a 60% chance of seeing another Christmas. When my phone finally vibrated, the responses cut deeper than the surgeon's scalpel had. "We're too busy today, just call an Uber," wrote Diana, my daughter-in-law of 15 years, the woman whose children I had raised while she climbed the corporate ladder at Meridian Pharmaceuticals. Then my son Philip, my only child. "Why don't you ever plan anything in advance, Mom?" I felt something crack inside me. Not my recently repaired heart, but something far more vital. 23 days ago, I'd kissed my grandchildren goodbye before flying to Cleveland for experimental surgery, telling everyone it was just a minor procedure to spare them worry. I'd faced the possibility of death alone in a strange city, signed waivers acknowledging the risks, and woken up in blinding pain with no family member's hand to hold. And now, I couldn't even get a ride home from the airport. My fingers hovered over the keyboard. I thought about telling them the truth, about the titanium device now keeping my heart chambers from collapsing, about the nights I'd lain awake, listening to the woman in the next hospital bed sob in pain, about the terror of nearly bleeding out on the operating table. Instead, I simply typed, "Okay." That single word, deceptively cheerful with its exclamation mark, concealed a decision forming within me. For 67 years, I had been the supporter, the helper, the one who set aside her own needs. Widowed at 49, I'd poured everything into supporting Philip through law school, babysitting my grandchildren 4 days a week, and even contributing $80,000 toward the down payment on their suburban McMansion. My reward? An Uber suggestion and a reprimand. With hands steadier than they'd been moments before, I opened another text thread, one with Dr. E. Harrison Wells, the renowned cardiologist who had initially consulted on my case before I'd been referred to Cleveland. We'd developed an unexpected friendship during those preliminary appointments. His kind eyes and attentive manner, a stark contrast to the clinical detachment I'd expected from someone of his stature. "Harrison," I typed, using his first name as he'd insisted, though it still felt presumptuous. "I know you're in Switzerland for your son's birthday, but I just landed in Atlanta after my surgery in Cleveland, having some transportation issues. Don't worry, I'll figure something out. Hope the celebration is wonderful." I sent it without expecting a response. He was probably still overseas, enjoying time with his family, not concerning himself with a 67-year-old widow's transportation problems. My phone rang almost immediately. "Pamela?" His deep voice, with that slight Boston accent, was unmistakable. "Where exactly are you in the airport?" I blinked in confusion. "Terminal B, but..." "Stay there. I'm at Terminal C right now. Just flew in from Zurich myself. What a coincidence." "You're here? In Atlanta?" I couldn't keep the disbelief from my voice. "Indeed I am. Edward's birthday celebration ended yesterday, and I caught the overnight flight. I'm actually waiting for my driver now. We can easily pick you up on the way. Do you have checked luggage?" "Just this carry-on," I said, patting the small suitcase containing 3 weeks of hospital existence. "But Harrison, I can't impose..." "Pamela," he interrupted gently, "you've just had major cardiac surgery. The last thing you need is to struggle with rideshare apps and strange drivers. Text me your exact location. Samuel and I will be there in 15 minutes. After we hung up, I sat in stunned silence. Dr. Harrison Wells, the man who had revolutionized cardiac care, whose research was featured in medical journals worldwide, who had a 6-month waiting list for consultations, was coming to pick me up at the airport like we were old friends. I checked my appearance in my compact mirror and winced. 3 weeks in the hospital had left me pale, with dark circles under my eyes and my silver hair hanging limp around my face. I'd lost 12 pounds I couldn't afford to lose, and my good blouse hung from my shoulders like a child playing dress-up. But there was nothing to be done about it now. I applied a touch of lipstick, a small vanity that seemed suddenly important, and waited. True to his word, 15 minutes later, a sleek black Bentley pulled up to the curb outside. The driver, an elegant older man in a crisp uniform, emerged and approached me directly. "Mrs. Hayes, I'm Samuel. Dr. Wells sent me to assist you." Before I could respond, another figure emerged from the car. tall, distinguished, with silver hair and those penetrating blue eyes that somehow managed to be both authoritative and kind. Harrison Wells wore a casual but impeccably tailored outfit that probably cost more than my monthly pension. "Pamela," he said warmly, taking my hand in both of his. "I've been wondering how the surgery went. Cleveland General has an excellent team, but I've been concerned." The genuine care in his voice nearly undid me after the coldness from my own family. To my horror, I felt tears threatening. Blinking them back, I summoned a smile. "It went as well as could be expected. I'm still here, aren't I?" His eyes narrowed slightly, seeing more than I wanted him to. "Yes, you are, and I'm very glad of that fact." He turned to Samuel. "Please, handle Mrs. Hayes's luggage carefully. She's still recovering." As Samuel took my small suitcase, Harrison offered his arm for support. The gesture was so unexpected, so courteously old-fashioned, that I hesitated before placing my hand in the crook of his elbow. "I don't want to be a burden," I murmured as he guided me toward the Bentley. "Pamela," he said, his voice low enough that only I could hear, "you could never be a burden. Now, let's get you home, and you can tell me why your family wasn't here to meet you." Something in his tone, a protective edge I'd never heard before, sent an unexpected warmth through me. As Samuel held the door open, I slid into the luxurious leather interior, wondering what my son and daughter-in-law would say if they could see me now. Little did I know that in a few hours, their frantic calls would be lighting up my phone, not out of concern for my health, but because they'd discovered exactly who had come to my rescue when they wouldn't. If this story of family neglect and unexpected connections has touched your heart, make sure to subscribe so you don't miss what happens next. Will Pamela finally stand up to her ungrateful family? And what is the true nature of her relationship with the distinguished Dr. Wells? The journey has just begun. The Bentley glided through Atlanta traffic like a ship through calm waters, insulated from the noise and chaos outside. Samuel navigated with the confidence of someone who knew every shortcut and traffic pattern, while Harrison sat beside me in the spacious back seat, a respectful distance between us. "You didn't answer my question," he said gently as we merged onto the highway. "About your family not meeting you." I smoothed an invisible wrinkle from my skirt, buying time. How could I explain without sounding bitter, or worse, pitiful? "They're busy people," I finally said. "Philip's a partner at Hargrove & Associates now. Diana's leading some important pharmaceutical campaign at Meridian." Harrison studied me with those penetrating blue eyes that seemed to catch every micro-expression, every evasion. I'd noticed that quality during our consultations, how he listened not just to what was said, but to what wasn't. "I see," he replied, though his tone suggested he saw far more than I'd admitted. "And they couldn't spare 30 minutes to pick up their mother after cardiac surgery?" Put so bluntly, it sounded even worse than it was. I felt a sudden, irrational urge to defend them. "It was last minute. I didn't give them much notice about my flight." "Because you didn't know when you'd be discharged," he countered smoothly. "That's how hospitals work. Surely they understood that." I turned to look out the window, watching the familiar landmarks of Atlanta pass by. "I didn't exactly tell them it was cardiac surgery," I admitted quietly. "I said it was a minor procedure. Pamela. Just my name, but filled with gentle reproof. The experimental valve reinforcement you underwent is anything but minor. Why would you downplay something so serious?" The question hung between us. Why indeed? The answer was complicated, tied to years of not wanting to be a burden, of making myself smaller to fit into the corners of my family's busy lives. "They have their own concerns," I said finally. "Diana's been trying to land some important partnership for Meridian. Philip's working on a big case. The kids have their activities. I didn't want to disrupt everything with my problems." Harrison shook his head slightly. "Your problem was life-threatening heart failure. That's not a disruption. That's a family emergency." His directness was both refreshing and unsettling. For years, I'd constructed elaborate justifications for my family's neglect, each one more hollow than the last. "May I ask you something personal?" he continued, his tone softening. I nodded, though apprehension fluttered in my chest. "Do they know who I am? Your family?" The question surprised me. "I mentioned consulting with you initially, yes. Diana was quite interested, actually." I hesitated, remembering her sudden attention when I'd mentioned Harrison's name. "She works in pharmaceutical public relations. I think your endorsement means a lot in her industry." Something shifted in his expression, a tightening around the eyes, a slight compression of his lips. "Ah, and did she ask you to make an introduction?" "She hinted at it," I admitted, feeling suddenly uncomfortable. "But I wouldn't impose on our professional relationship that way." He smiled then, the tension dissipating. "Our relationship has evolved beyond purely professional, I think. We've had, 7 or 8 conversations about everything from cardiac health to Italian opera? I consider you a friend, Pamela." Friend. The word warmed something long cold inside me. When had I last made a new friend? Not an acquaintance, not someone's mother or someone's neighbor, but a person who chose my company for its own sake. "I consider you a friend too," I said softly, "which is why I wouldn't use that friendship for Diana's professional gain." He reached over and briefly touched my hand, a gesture so unexpected that I nearly gasped. His fingers were warm, the touch light, but somehow anchoring. "Your integrity is refreshing," he said. "Now, tell me about the surgery. Did Dr. Levinson use the titanium mesh reinforcement or the newer polymer blend?" For the remainder of the drive, we discussed my procedure in detail, Harrison explaining aspects the Cleveland doctors hadn't fully clarified. His ability to make complex medical concepts accessible without condescension was remarkable, another facet of this multidimensional man I was still discovering. As we approached my modest suburban home, I felt a strange reluctance. The thought of returning to my empty house, to the silence and solitude that had been my constant companions since Thomas died 18 years ago, suddenly seemed unbearable after these moments of connection. "Would you like Samuel and me to help you get settled?" Harrison asked, as if sensing my hesitation. "You shouldn't be lifting anything yet, and there may be some things you need from the store." "That's very kind, but I couldn't impose further." "It's not an imposition," he interrupted firmly. "In fact, I insist. Doctor's orders." The authoritative tone made me smile despite myself. "Well, if it's doctor's orders." Samuel pulled into my driveway and immediately came around to open my door, offering his arm with the same courteous formality as his employer. Harrison followed with my suitcase, and together they escorted me to my front door like a royal entourage. Inside, I was acutely aware of how the house might appear to someone like Harrison. My furniture was well-maintained but dated, the decor modest and practical, nothing like the elegant sophistication I imagined in his own home. Yet he moved through my space with genuine appreciation, commenting on a watercolor Thomas and I had purchased on our 20th anniversary, asking about a quilted throw my grandmother had made. While Samuel disappeared to the grocery store with a list Harrison had imperiously dictated, "You need proper nutrition for recovery, not whatever convenience foods are in your freezer," the doctor insisted on making tea in my kitchen. "I hope you don't mind," he said, finding cups and saucers with surprising ease. "I find ritual comforting after medical procedures. My mother always believed a proper cup of tea could cure anything short of a severed limb." The normality of watching this distinguished man moving about my kitchen, steeping tea as if we'd done this 100 times before, created an intimacy that made my breath catch. Or perhaps that was just my healing heart, adjusting to new rhythms. When my phone began vibrating insistently on the counter, I glanced at it with irritation, then froze. 48 missed calls, 32 text messages, all from Philip and Diana. "Is something wrong?" Harrison asked, noting my expression. I stared at the screen in confusion. "I'm not sure. My family suddenly seems very eager to reach me." As I unlocked the phone, a new notification appeared, a social media alert. With growing disbelief, I opened it to find a photo posted by Harrison an hour ago. Both of us in the Bentley, his hand supportively under my elbow, with the caption, "Honored to assist my friend Pamela Hayes home after her courageous journey through pioneering cardiac surgery. A remarkable woman with extraordinary resilience." The post already had thousands of likes and comments, including one from Diana. "Dr. Wells, that's my mother-in-law. We've been trying to reach you for months regarding Meridian's Cardio Restore project." I looked up at Harrison, whose expression was impossible to read. "Did you know?" I asked quietly. "About Diana trying to reach you professionally?" "Let's just say," he replied, setting a perfectly brewed cup of tea before me, "that your daughter-in-law's reputation precedes her, and now it seems she's discovered a connection she never knew existed." His smile contained something I couldn't quite identify. Satisfaction, perhaps, or even mischief. like a chess player who had just executed a particularly elegant move. "Pamela," he said, taking the seat across from me, "I believe your phone will be quite busy for the foreseeable future. Shall we silence it and enjoy our tea?" By evening, the missed calls had doubled. I watched the number climb with a detached curiosity, as if observing a natural phenomenon rather than my family's mounting panic. Harrison and Samuel had departed after ensuring I was comfortably settled, leaving behind a refrigerator stocked with prepared meals, my medications organized in a sophisticated pill dispenser, and a business card with Harrison's private number written on the back in his precise handwriting. "Call any time," he'd said at the door, his eyes holding mine a moment longer than necessary. "Day or night. I mean that, Pamela." The warmth of those words had lingered after his Bentley disappeared down the street. Now, as I sat in my favorite armchair with a light shawl around my shoulders, I finally decided to acknowledge the communication bombardment. I chose to read the texts first. Philip. "Mom, call me immediately." Diana. "Is that really Dr. Harrison Wells with you? How do you know him?" Philip. "Why aren't you answering your phone? This is important." Diana. "Mom Hayes, please call. We need to talk about your connection to Dr. Wells ASAP." The progression was telling, from initial shock to barely concealed desperation, with Diana's messages increasingly focused on my connection rather than my well-being. Not a single text asked how I was feeling after the surgery or if I'd gotten home safely. When the doorbell rang, sharp and insistent, I wasn't surprised. The confrontation was inevitable. I just hadn't expected it so soon. I opened the door to find Philip and Diana on my porch, both still in their work clothes, their expressions a study in controlled agitation. Diana's perfectly highlighted hair and immaculate makeup couldn't conceal the calculation behind her eyes, while Philip's forced smile did little to mask his tension. "Mom," he exclaimed with manufactured concern, "we've been trying to reach you for hours. Why didn't you call us back?" "I was resting," I replied simply, stepping aside to let them enter. "Doctor's orders after cardiac surgery." Diana's head snapped up. "Cardiac surgery? You said it was a minor procedure." "Did I?" I moved slowly back to my armchair, leaving them to follow. "Well, it was minor in that I survived it." The sarcasm was unlike me, and Philip noticed immediately. His brow furrowed as he took in the pill dispenser on the coffee table, the medical documents neatly stacked beside it. "Mom, what's really going on? First you downplay some surgery, then you appear on social media with Harrison Wells of all people." I settled into my chair, adjusting my shawl with deliberate calm. I had experimental cardiac valve reinforcement surgery. There was a 40% chance I wouldn't survive it. Dr. Wells was my initial consulting physician before I was referred to specialists in Cleveland. The blunt disclosure hung in the air. Diana recovered first, sliding onto my sofa with practiced elegance. "Why didn't you tell us it was so serious?" she asked, her voice modulated to convey concern, though her eyes kept darting to the pill dispenser as if it might contain clues about Harrison. "Would it have mattered?" I countered quietly. "You were too busy to pick me up from the airport after knowing I'd had surgery. Would knowing it was high risk have changed anything?" Philip at least had the grace to look ashamed. "Of course it would have. We would have been there if we'd known." "Would you?" I interrupted, surprising myself with my directness. "The way you were there for my knee replacement last year, when you visited for 15 minutes between meetings? Or the way you were there when I had pneumonia by sending flowers rather than checking on me in person?" My son's face flushed. "That's not fair, Mom. We have demanding careers, children with activities. Yes, careers and children that benefited greatly from my constant support," I finished for him. "The same support that apparently doesn't extend both ways." An uncomfortable silence fell. Diana, ever the strategist, changed tactics. "Dr. Wells seems very attentive," she observed, feigning casualness. "You never mentioned you were such close friends." Here it was, the real reason for their visit. Not concern for my health, but access to Harrison. I felt a cold clarity settle over me. "We became acquainted during my consultations," I said simply. "He's a compassionate physician who takes genuine interest in his patients." "Compassionate enough to pick you up from the airport personally? In his Bentley?" Diana pressed, leaning forward. "That seems beyond professional courtesy. Perhaps he simply recognized that I needed assistance when my own family did not." The words were quiet, but landed with precision. Philip shifted uncomfortably. "Mom, about the airport, We should have been there. I'm sorry. His apology, while seemingly sincere, came far too late, and for transparent reasons. I merely nodded in acknowledgement. So, Diana continued, unable to contain herself any longer. How well do you know Dr. Wells exactly? His endorsement could transform Meridian's new cardiovascular drug program. I've been trying to reach him for months. And there it was, the naked ambition behind their sudden attention. Not my surgery, not my well-being, but what I could potentially provide access to. Well enough that he chose to help me today, I replied carefully. Beyond that, our relationship is private. Private? Philip echoed, confusion evident. Mom, what does that mean? I smiled slightly, remembering Harrison's hand on mine in the car, the warmth in his eyes as he'd said goodbye. It means that some things aren't for professional leveraging, Diana. Some connections have value beyond networking opportunities. Diana's perfectly composed facade cracked slightly. But you must understand how important this could be for Meridian, for our family's financial security. Just one introduction. I believe Dr. Wells is aware of Meridian's interest, I interrupted, thinking of our conversation in the car. He seems quite informed about pharmaceutical industry matters. Something in my tone must have alerted Diana, because her expression suddenly sharpened. Did you tell him I've been trying to contact him? He asked if my family knew who he was, I said truthfully. I mentioned you worked in pharmaceutical PR and had expressed interest in his endorsement. Diana's face paled. And what did he say? I considered the question, remembering the subtle shift in Harrison's expression. He seemed unsurprised. The atmosphere in the room changed perceptibly. Diana stood abruptly, smoothing her skirt with hands that trembled slightly. We should let you rest, she announced, professional smile back in place. Philip, your mother needs her recovery time. My son looked between us, clearly sensing undercurrents he didn't fully understand. Right, but Mom, we really should talk more about your surgery. Maybe I could come by tomorrow. Before I could respond, my phone chimed with a text notification. I glanced down to see Harrison's name on the screen, checking in on my favorite patient. Dinner tomorrow evening? I know a place that accommodates cardiac diets beautifully. Samuel can collect you at 7. I couldn't prevent the small smile that touched my lips, nor did I miss Diana's laser focus on my reaction. I'm afraid I have plans tomorrow evening, I told Philip, feeling a long dormant flutter of anticipation. Perhaps another time. As they finally departed with promises to check in soon, I watched from my window as they engaged in intense conversation in the driveway, Diana gesticulating emphatically while Philip nodded. Only after their car disappeared did I allow myself to read Harrison's message again, my finger hovering over the response button. Was this merely a doctor checking on a patient? A friend offering support? Or something else entirely? Whatever it was, for the first time in years, I felt like more than just someone's mother or grandmother. I felt like Pamela again, a woman with her own identity, her own possibilities. I typed my reply. I'd be delighted. 7 p.m. works perfectly. I stood before my bedroom mirror, assessing my reflection with critical eyes. The black dress, purchased 3 years ago for a law firm gala I'd attended as Philip's +1 when Diana was out of town, was the most elegant item in my wardrobe. Still, it felt woefully inadequate for dinner with a man who probably owned homes on multiple continents. Was this even a date? The question had plagued me all day. Harrison's invitation could easily be interpreted as a doctor checking on a patient, or a friend offering distraction during recovery. Yet something in his manner, in the way his gaze had lingered when we parted, suggested possibilities I'd long ago filed away as no longer relevant to my life. At 67, with a freshly repaired heart and silver hair I'd stopped coloring 5 years ago, romance seemed an absurd consideration. And yet, the doorbell chimed precisely at 7. I took a steadying breath, applied a final touch of the coral lipstick that Thomas had always said brought out the warmth in my complexion, and made my way to the door. Samuel stood on my porch, impeccable in his uniform. Good evening, Mrs. Hayes. The doctor is waiting in the car. Thank you, Samuel. I retrieved my wrap and small evening purse, locking the door behind me. The Bentley sat in my driveway like an elegant visitor from another world. As Samuel opened the rear door, I caught sight of Harrison inside, dressed in a perfectly tailored dark suit that made my breath catch slightly. Pamela, he said warmly as I slid into the seat beside him. You look absolutely lovely. Thank you, I replied, suddenly self-conscious. though I'm afraid my post-surgery wardrobe options are rather limited. His eyes, that remarkable shade of blue that seemed to shift with the light, took in my appearance with frank appreciation. The dress is perfect. That shade of black brings out the silver in your hair beautifully. Such a specific compliment, not the generic flattery one offers out of politeness. I found myself blushing like a schoolgirl. "How are you feeling?" he continued, as Samuel pulled away from my house. "Any discomfort? Shortness of breath?" "Just the usual post-surgical fatigue," I assured him, "and perhaps some lingering effects from yesterday's family confrontation." Harrison's expression sharpened with interest. "Ah, yes. I imagine my social media post created quite a stir. That's putting it mildly." I studied him carefully. "Was that deliberate? Posting that photo when you did?" A smile played at the corners of his mouth. "Let's just say I've learned that sometimes a strategic revelation can clarify complex situations rather efficiently." "You knew exactly who Diana was, didn't you?" The question had bothered me since yesterday. Harrison was quiet for a moment, looking out at the Atlanta skyline as we approached downtown. "Your daughter-in-law has something of a reputation in pharmaceutical circles," he finally said, "particularly among physicians whose endorsements are actively sought." "What kind of reputation?" I asked, though I suspected I already knew. "The kind that prioritizes connections over content," he replied diplomatically. "Meridian's cardio-restored drug has potential, but their clinical trials have shown mixed results at best. What they need is more research, not more marketing." I processed this information, piecing it together with Diana's desperate attempts to reach him, and her persistent efforts to contact you. 17 emails to my office in the past 4 months, he confirmed. 6 attempted approaches at medical conferences, 2 invitations to speak at Meridian-sponsored events, all declined by my staff. "Yet you never mentioned this when I told you about my family," I noted. His gaze returned to me, surprisingly gentle. "I didn't want to taint your family relationships with my professional judgments. Although," he paused, "I admit I was curious about the connection when you first mentioned your daughter-in-law worked for Meridian. I just didn't anticipate finding Diana Reynolds was your family member." The use of Diana's full name confirmed he'd known exactly who she was all along. A small part of me wondered if his initial interest in me had been influenced by this connection, but I immediately dismissed the thought. Harrison had been kind to me long before learning my family details. The Bentley glided to a stop before a discreet building I didn't recognize. No prominent signage, just an elegant doorman who nodded respectfully as Samuel opened our door. "The Claremont," Harrison explained, offering me his arm. "A private dining club. I think you'll find it comfortable, quiet enough for conversation, excellent food tailored to any dietary needs." The interior was a study in understated luxury, rich wood paneling, subdued lighting from crystal fixtures, and well-spaced tables ensuring privacy. The maitre d' greeted Harrison by name, leading us to a secluded corner table with views of the Atlanta skyline now glittering with evening lights. "Dr. Wells, so wonderful to have you back. Mrs. Hayes, welcome to the Claremont." I noted with interest that no explanation of my relationship to Harrison seemed necessary. Was I assumed to be a patient, a colleague, something else entirely? Once seated, Harrison ordered for both of us with a confidence that should have felt presumptuous, but somehow didn't. A selection of heart-healthy options that still managed to sound delicious, paired with a non-alcoholic sparkling beverage that arrived in champagne flutes. "To new beginnings," he said, raising his glass, "and unexpected connections." I touched my glass to his, studying the distinguished face across from me. At what my daughter-in-law would call a mature 70, Harrison Wells bore his age with the confidence of a man who had accomplished much and regretted little. The lines around his eyes spoke of both laughter and concentration, his hands of skilled work and precise movements. "May I ask you something personal?" I ventured after we'd begun our first course. "Of course. Why did you respond to my text yesterday? You must have dozens of patients with far more serious conditions than mine." He considered the question thoughtfully. "Do you know what attracted me to cardiology, Pamela?" The apparent non sequitur caught me off guard. "No, I don't. The heart is remarkable, resilient yet vulnerable, constantly adapting, utterly essential yet often taken for granted." His gaze held mine. "In my 40 years of practice, I've found that people with the strongest hearts, physically speaking, are not always those with the most meaningful lives, and those with damaged hearts often possess the greatest capacity for genuine connection." And which category do I fall into? I asked, my voice softer than intended. You, he replied without hesitation, are that rare case of physical vulnerability and emotional strength coexisting in perfect balance. From our first meeting, I sensed you carried others' burdens without complaint, gave without expectation of return. Yet yesterday, seeing how your family responded to your needs, he paused. Let's just say professional interest evolved into personal concern. I'm not looking for pity, I said quickly. Pity? He looked genuinely surprised. Pamela, what I feel for you is the furthest thing from pity imaginable. The intensity in his eyes made me look away, focusing instead on the glittering city beyond the window. After Thomas died, I'd packed away certain expectations along with his clothes. Romance, partnership, the particular joy of being truly seen by another person. To feel those possibilities stirring again was both exhilarating and terrifying. Tell me about your son, I said, deliberately changing the subject. The one whose birthday you attended in Switzerland. If Harrison noticed my deflection, he graciously allowed it, launching into stories about Edward, a humanitarian architect designing sustainable housing in developing countries. As he spoke, I caught glimpses of the father behind the distinguished physician, proud, supportive, deeply invested in his child's happiness without attempting to control his choices. So different from my own relationship with Philip, where my support had always been expected, but rarely acknowledged, my opinion solicited only when convenient. You know, Harrison said as we finished our main course, Edward asked about you when I mentioned I was meeting you for dinner tonight. This surprised me. He asked about me? But he doesn't even know me. Ah, but I may have mentioned you in a few of our conversations over the past months. A hint of self-consciousness crossed his features. He says I speak about you differently than my other patients. Differently how? I asked, heart suddenly beating a little faster, and not due to my cardiac condition. Harrison's phone chimed before he could answer. He glanced at it with an apologetic smile that quickly transformed into a frown. Is something wrong? I asked. Possibly, he replied, his expression concerned. It's from my office, a patient having complications. He hesitated. Pamela, I hate to cut our evening short, but you need to go, I finished for him. Of course, your patients need you. Relief and regret mingled in his expression. Samuel will see you home safely. May I call you tomorrow? I'd like that, I said, surprised by my own boldness. As he rose to leave, Harrison did something unexpected. He leaned down and pressed a gentle kiss to my cheek, his hand lightly touching my shoulder. This evening meant a great deal to me, he said quietly, more than I can properly express with a medical emergency waiting. But we'll continue our conversation very soon. After he departed, I sat momentarily stunned, my fingertips touching the spot where his lips had brushed my skin. Samuel appeared discreetly at my side a few minutes later. Dr. Wells asked me to ensure you enjoy dessert before taking you home, Mrs. Hayes. He specifically recommended the crème brûlée. It's heart-healthy, apparently. I smiled at this small, thoughtful detail, Harrison making sure I didn't feel abandoned despite his necessary departure. As I savored the delicate dessert, my phone chimed with a text notification. Expecting Harrison, I was surprised to see Diana's name instead. Just heard Dr. Wells had to leave Claremont for emergency. Didn't know you were dining there tonight. We need to talk about your relationship with him. It's crucial for Meridian's future. Breakfast tomorrow? I set the phone down slowly. Appetite suddenly diminished. How had Diana known where I was dining? Who had told her about Harrison's departure? The evening that had felt like a magical departure from my ordinary life suddenly seemed more complicated, threaded with agendas and surveillance I didn't fully understand. As Samuel drove me home later, I gazed out at the night-darkened streets, wondering exactly what I had stumbled into, and whether my newly repaired heart was strong enough to handle whatever came next. Diana arrived at my house the next morning with a designer coffee carrier and a pink bakery box, her version of a peace offering. Her Meridian Pharmaceuticals identification badge still hung around her neck, suggesting this visit was sandwiched between professional obligations rather than a priority in itself. Cranberry orange scones, she announced, setting the box on my kitchen counter. Your favorite. I accepted the coffee she handed me. Decaf. At least she'd remembered that much about my post-surgery restrictions. Thank you, though I don't recall agreeing to breakfast. Her smile faltered slightly. I thought after our last conversation we could use a fresh start. Family supporting family, right? Family supporting family. The irony was almost painful. Of course, I replied, gesturing toward the small breakfast nook where Philip and Diana had often sat as newlyweds, seeking my advice on everything from investment strategies to dinner party menus. Before success made my counsel seem quaint and outdated, Diana settled across from me, her expression carefully composed into professional warmth, the same look I'd seen her practice for corporate photographs. So you and Dr. Wells, no preamble, not even a pretense of interest in my recovery. I sipped my coffee, letting the silence stretch uncomfortably. How did you know I was at the Claremont last night? I asked finally. She blinked, momentarily thrown by my directness. Oh, Atlanta's medical community is surprisingly small. A colleague saw you there. A colleague who also knew the moment Harrison left for his emergency? Diana's fingers tightened almost imperceptibly around her coffee cup. It was mentioned, yes. Interesting coincidence, I observed mildly. Your colleague happening to be at a private dining club, recognizing me and immediately reporting to you. Mom Hayes, she began, switching to the faux affectionate form of address she used when trying to manipulate me. I think we're getting off track. I'm just trying to understand your relationship with Dr. Wells, for family reasons. Family reasons, I repeated. Not Meridian reasons? Her smile stiffened. Well, of course his connection to our family could have professional implications. That's just reality. But my primary concern is you. The lie hung between us, as transparent as cellophane. I thought of Harrison's words about Diana's reputation, about her persistent attempts to reach him professionally. What exactly do you want to know, Diana? Relief flooded her features at what she perceived as my capitulation. How did you two really connect? It can't just be from your initial consultation. He never gives patients that kind of personal attention. Perhaps I'm not just any patient, I replied, surprising myself with the hint of steel in my voice. Clearly, she agreed, leaning forward eagerly, which is why I'm trying to understand. Is it a friendship? A professional relationship? Something more? The hesitation before more carried volumes of implication. I thought of Harrison's kiss on my cheek, the warmth in his eyes when he looked at me, moments that felt private, precious, not to be dissected for Diana's professional gain. My relationship with Harrison is personal, I said firmly, not a networking opportunity. Frustration flickered across her perfectly made-up face. Mom Hayes, you don't understand what's at stake here. Meridian's Cardio Restore drug could revolutionize heart disease treatment, but we need Wells' endorsement. Do you know how many lives could be improved? Including yours. Interesting, I murmured. Harrison mentioned Cardio Restore has shown mixed results in clinical trials, that it needs more research, not more marketing. Diana went very still. He discussed Meridian's products with you? Briefly, I confirmed. He seemed quite knowledgeable about the company's approaches and about your attempts to contact him. The color drained from her face. What exactly did he say? That you've been quite persistent. 17 emails, I believe? 6 approaches at conferences? I took another sip of my coffee, watching realization dawn in her eyes. He knew exactly who you were when I mentioned my daughter-in-law worked for Meridian. And you told him about our relationship anyway? Her voice rose sharply. Do you have any idea what that could do to my professional reputation? To have my mother-in-law discussing me with the very physician I've been trying to establish a relationship with? You mean the way you discussed me with colleagues who spied on my private dinner? I countered quietly. Diana stood abruptly, abandoning all pretense of familial concern. This isn't just about me. Philip's law firm handles significant portions of Meridian's legal work. Our family's financial security is tied to my success there. Your grandchildren's college funds, our mortgage, everything could be affected if this Cardio Restore deal falls through. So that's why you're suddenly interested in my friendship with Harrison, I said, the pieces finally clicking into place. Not concern for my well-being after surgery, but fear that I might damage your professional ambitions. That's not fair, she protested, though her expression betrayed her. Family and business are naturally intertwined. I thought you understood that. I thought of all the times I'd rearranged my life to accommodate their careers, the countless hours babysitting so Diana could attend networking events, the family gatherings scheduled around their professional commitments, the emotional support offered without expectation of reciprocity. I understand perfectly, I said, rising with as much dignity as my still healing body allowed. I understand that my value to this family has always been measured by what I can provide, not who I am. That's not true, but her denial lacked conviction. "We appreciate everything you do." "Everything I do," I echoed. "Not who I am." "There's a difference, Diana." My phone chimed from the counter. Harrison's distinctive tone. Diana's gaze darted toward it immediately, naked calculation replacing her previous dismay. "You should answer that," she said, professional smile back in place. "And perhaps mention that we were just having a lovely family breakfast? That I was checking on your recovery?" The transparent attempt at damage control might have been amusing if it weren't so sad. I moved to retrieve my phone, glancing at the message. "Good morning, Pamela. Apologies again for our interrupted evening. Patient stabilized. Would you consider accompanying me to the Symphony Gala this Saturday? Black tie affair benefiting cardiac research. Samuel can help with arrangements if you're interested. A formal event, in public, as Harrison's companion." The implications made my newly reinforced heart flutter in a way that probably wasn't medically advisable. "Well?" Diana prompted, trying to sound casual. "What does the good doctor want?" I slipped the phone into my pocket without responding. "I think our breakfast is concluded, Diana. Please give my love to Philip and the children." Her expression hardened. "So that's how it's going to be? You'll prioritize some new relationship over your family's needs?" "No," I corrected her gently. "I'm finally prioritizing my needs alongside my family's. It's an adjustment for all of us, I imagine." After she left, bakery box abandoned, coffee barely touched, I stood in my kitchen feeling strangely light despite the confrontation. For decades, I'd measured my worth by what I could give to others, particularly my family. The possibility of choosing something for myself, of exploring a connection that existed outside those well-worn channels of obligation, felt simultaneously terrifying and exhilarating. I reread Harrison's message, then typed my reply. "I would be delighted to attend. Though I should warn you, my presence as your companion will likely spark certain professional overtures from Meridian Pharmaceuticals." His response came almost immediately. "I'm counting on it. Some situations benefit from direct confrontation in the proper setting. Besides, I'm rather looking forward to seeing you in formal attire. You were stunning in simple black. I can only imagine what you might choose for a gala." I felt a blush warm my cheeks, ridiculous at my age. Another text followed quickly. "Samuel will arrange for suitable options to be delivered for your selection. Unless you'd prefer to shop yourself? Either way, the expense is handled. Consider it part of your cardiac rehabilitation program. Doctor's orders." I laughed aloud at his audacity, then sobered as I realized the implications. Saturday's gala would make whatever was developing between Harrison and me publicly visible. Diana would undoubtedly be there representing Meridian. The pharmaceutical world would note Harrison Wells arriving with an unknown woman, a woman connected to Diana Reynolds, who had been unsuccessfully pursuing his professional attention for months. I was stepping onto a stage I hadn't chosen, becoming a player in a drama whose full script I didn't possess. Yet despite the uncertainty, I felt more alive than I had in years. My finger hovered over the keyboard momentarily before I typed, "I'll accept Samuel's assistance with attire options. But Harrison, I need to understand. Is this invitation personal or strategic?" His reply made my breath catch. "Both, but the personal far outweighs the strategic. The gala merely provides a convenient setting for addressing several matters simultaneously. Most importantly, the pleasure of your company." As I set the phone down, I caught my reflection in the kitchen window, cheeks flushed, eyes bright, looking years younger than the woman who had flown to Cleveland for surgery just weeks ago. Whatever game was being played between Harrison and Meridian, I was no longer merely a pawn. I was becoming a queen on this chessboard, with moves and power all my own, and Saturday night would be my opening gambit. The stakes are rising as Pamela discovers she's caught between pharmaceutical power plays and unexpected romance. Will the Symphony Gala bring confrontation or connection? And what are Harrison's true intentions toward both Pamela and Meridian? Comment where you're watching from, and subscribe now to see what happens next in this thrilling story of late-life empowerment. "Too matronly," I murmured, turning away from my reflection in the full-length mirror. The navy blue gown with its conservative neckline and elbow-length sleeves made me look exactly what I was, a 67-year-old grandmother dressing appropriately for her age. Samuel, seated patiently in the corner of my bedroom, nodded in agreement. "Perhaps the next option, Mrs. Hayes?" When Harrison had mentioned suitable options, I'd envisioned a few dresses delivered for my consideration. Instead, Samuel had arrived with what appeared to be an entire boutique's worth of evening wear, a professional stylist named Margot, and a makeup artist introduced simply as Inez. Dr. Wells was quite specific about ensuring you had adequate choices, Samuel had explained, his British understatement somehow making the extravagance seem perfectly reasonable. Now, stepping out of the rejected navy gown, I allowed Margot to help me into the next selection, an emerald green silk that caught the light with subtle shimmer. "This," Margot declared with professional confidence, "is the one." I turned toward the mirror and barely recognized the woman staring back. The dress wasn't revealing in the conventional sense, no plunging neckline or daring slits, but its sophisticated cut and rich color transformed my silver hair from merely aging to striking, the draping fabric skimming over my post-surgery frame with elegant forgiveness. "The color brings out your eyes," Inez observed, approaching with her formidable array of makeup brushes. "We'll keep the makeup classic, but with definition. You have remarkable bone structure." "At my age, that's a polite way of saying I've lost facial fat," I replied dryly. Inez smiled. "At your age, Mrs. Hayes, it's a genetic blessing many younger women would envy. Now please sit." As she worked, applying layers of products with artistic precision, I contemplated the surreal nature of my situation. 3 weeks ago, I'd been in a hospital bed, uncertain if I would survive. Now I was being prepared like Cinderella for a ball, with a distinguished cardiologist playing the role of unlikely fairy godmother. "May I ask a personal question, Samuel?" I ventured as Inez focused on my eye makeup. "Of course, Mrs. Hayes." His tone remained professionally neutral. "Has Dr. Wells ever sent you to assist other patients this way?" A barely perceptible pause. "Dr. Wells has always shown exceptional concern for his patients' comfort." "That doesn't quite answer my question," I noted. This time, Samuel's hesitation was more pronounced. "Dr. Wells values his privacy, as I'm sure you understand." "I do," I conceded, "but I find myself in an unusual situation, attending a major social event with a man I barely know, yet who has shown extraordinary interest in my welfare. It's natural to wonder where I stand." Samuel's expression softened slightly. "Without violating confidences, Mrs. Hayes, I can say that in 15 years of service, I have never seen the doctor take such a personal interest in a patient's well-being. Nor have I been dispatched with a styling team and specific instructions about ensuring someone feels, as he put it, as extraordinary as she truly is." The simple statement warmed me more than any flowery declaration could have. Before I could respond, Inez declared her work complete and turned my chair toward the mirror. The woman looking back at me was still unmistakably 67, with lines earned through decades of laughter and worry. But she was also undeniably elegant, her silver hair swept into a sophisticated updo, her makeup enhancing rather than masking her features. "One final touch," Margot said, approaching with a velvet box. "Dr. Wells selected these himself." Inside lay a pair of teardrop emerald earrings, simple yet unmistakably valuable, suspended from delicate platinum settings. "I couldn't possibly," I began. "Dr. Wells anticipated your objection," Samuel interjected smoothly. "He asked me to assure you these are merely on loan from the jeweler for the evening, though he did mention they could become a gift if you found them pleasing." The thoughtfulness of the gesture, providing luxury without presumption or pressure, touched me deeply. Harrison had somehow intuited both my discomfort with extravagance and my desire to feel beautiful again after weeks of medical indignities. When the doorbell rang precisely at 7, I felt a flutter of nerves that had nothing to do with my cardiac condition. Samuel excused himself to answer while Margot made final adjustments to my dress. "Remember," she instructed, "small steps in these heels. Shoulders back, chin slightly lifted. You are not apologizing for occupying space, Mrs. Hayes. You are claiming it, claiming space." After decades of making myself smaller to accommodate others, the concept felt revolutionary. I descended my modest staircase to find Harrison waiting in my living room, resplendent in a perfectly tailored tuxedo that made him look like he'd stepped from the pages of a luxury magazine. When he turned and saw me, the expression that crossed his face, a mixture of appreciation and something deeper, more personal, made every minute of the afternoon's preparations worthwhile. "Pamela," he said softly, approaching to take both my hands in his, "you look absolutely breathtaking." "The team you sent worked minor miracles," I demurred. "No," he corrected gently. They merely enhanced what was already there. His gaze held mine with an intensity that made my carefully applied makeup feel suddenly warm. The emeralds were the right choice. They bring out the remarkable green in your eyes. They're beautiful, I acknowledged, though far too generous for a simple loan. A smile played at the corners of his mouth. We'll discuss their status later. For now, he offered his arm with old-world courtesy. Shall we make our entrance? The symphony hall gleamed with light as we approached, its neoclassical columns illuminated against the night sky. A red carpet stretched from the curb to the entrance, flanked by photographers documenting the arrival of Atlanta's elite. I felt a moment of panic at the prospect of such visibility. "Harrison?" I murmured as Samuel opened the car door. "I'm not accustomed to this level of exposure." He covered my hand with his, warm and reassuring. "Just look at me if it becomes overwhelming. We'll walk straight through. You don't need to pose or speak to anyone." But as we emerged from the Bentley, a ripple of recognition passed through the waiting photographers. Flashbulbs erupted immediately. "Dr. Wells, over here! Doctor, who's your companion tonight?" Harrison guided me forward with a protective hand at the small of my back, acknowledging the cameras with practiced ease while maintaining our steady progress toward the entrance. The confidence of his movements steadied me, allowing me to walk with the dignity Margot had coached rather than the deer-in-headlights panic I felt. Just before we reached the doors, Harrison paused and turned slightly, positioning us for what I realized was a deliberate photograph. His arm slipped around my waist in a gesture that was unmistakably more than professional, his smile warm and genuine as he looked down at me. "Forgive the theatrics," he murmured, his lips close to my ear. "Sometimes a picture truly is worth 1,000 words." Inside, the grand foyer buzzed with Atlanta's social and business elite in formal attire, champagne flutes glinting under crystal chandeliers. Harrison guided me through the crowd with practiced ease, stopping occasionally to exchange greetings with colleagues who eyed me with undisguised curiosity. He introduced me simply as Pamela Hayes, my guest this evening, offering no explanation of our connection. The ambiguity clearly intrigued his acquaintances, whose speculative glances followed us as we moved through the room. "Everyone is wondering who I am," I observed quietly. "Let them wonder," he replied, a hint of mischief in his eyes. "Curiosity is good for the soul." "And for your reputation? Arriving with an unknown woman of a certain age?" His expression sobered. "Pamela, my reputation is built on 40 years of medical excellence, not social appearances. Besides," he paused, his gaze sweeping the room before returning to me with surprising intensity. "I'm rather enjoying watching Atlanta society try to categorize what they're seeing between us." "And what exactly are they seeing?" I asked, suddenly bold. Before he could answer, a voice cut through our moment of connection. "Dr. Wells, what an unexpected pleasure." Diana stood before us, resplendent in a designer gown that probably cost more than my monthly pension, her professional smile firmly in place. Beside her, Philip looked uncomfortable in his tuxedo, his expression caught between embarrassment and calculation as he looked between Harrison and me. "Mrs. Reynolds," Harrison replied with perfect courtesy, though I noted he used Diana's formal name rather than any warmer greeting. "Mr. Hayes, good evening. Dr. Wells, we had no idea you'd be attending with family," Diana continued smoothly, emphasizing the last word while extending her hand. What a delightful surprise. As Harrison took her hand briefly, I caught the flash of triumph in Diana's eyes. She had achieved in this moment what months of professional pursuit had failed to deliver: direct contact with Harrison Wells, with the added leverage of family connection. What she couldn't possibly know was how thoroughly Harrison had anticipated this very encounter, and how completely the evening was about to upend everyone's expectations, including perhaps my own. "Actually," Harrison replied smoothly, his hand finding the small of my back with subtle possessiveness, "I'm not here with family. I'm here with my date." The word hung in the air between us. Date. Simple, unambiguous, and utterly shocking to Diana, whose professional smile faltered visibly. "Your date?" she repeated, eyes darting between us as if trying to solve a particularly complex equation. "Yes," Harrison confirmed, his tone pleasantly conversational despite the small bomb he'd just detonated. "Pamela and I have been getting to know each other over the past weeks. When I learned she was recovering from cardiac surgery, It seemed the perfect opportunity to invite her to an event benefiting heart research. Philip stared at me, as if I'd suddenly sprouted wings. "Mom, you never mentioned you were dating Dr. Wells." "There are many things I don't mention, Philip," I replied, finding unexpected confidence in Harrison's steady presence beside me, my personal life being foremost among them. Diana recovered quickly, her PR training reasserting itself. "Well, this is simply wonderful. Family connections becoming personal connections." She turned her megawatt smile on Harrison. "Dr. Wells, I've been hoping for an opportunity to discuss Meridian's Cardio Restore program with you. Perhaps we could—" "Mrs. Reynolds," Harrison interrupted with impeccable politeness, "I make it a policy not to discuss business at charitable events. I'm sure you understand." "Of course," Diana backpedaled smoothly. "Though as family now—" "We're not family, Mrs. Reynolds," Harrison corrected, his tone remaining pleasant but taking on a subtle edge. "I am enjoying a personal relationship with Pamela. That relationship does not extend to professional connections with her relatives." The brutal clarity of his boundary setting left Diana momentarily speechless, a condition I'd rarely witnessed in my ambitious daughter-in-law. Philip, ever the attorney, attempted to salvage the increasingly awkward exchange. "Dr. Wells, we're simply surprised by this development. My mother has been through a serious medical procedure, and we're naturally concerned about her well-being." "Are you?" Harrison asked mildly. "I understood you were too busy to collect her from the airport following that procedure. Fortunately, I was available to ensure she reached home safely." The pointed reference to their neglect made Philip flush with embarrassment. Before he could respond, a silver-haired woman in a stunning red gown approached our group. "Harrison, darling, the board members are asking for you. Something about the donation announcement." She turned to me with genuine warmth. "And you must be Pamela. Harrison has mentioned you several times. I'm Catherine Winslow, Symphony Guild president, and Harrison's ex-wife." Ex-wife. The revelation startled me nearly as much as it clearly shocked Diana and Philip. Catherine took my hand in both of hers, her grip firm and friendly. "Harrison never brings dates to these functions," she confided in a stage whisper, clearly meant to be overheard. "You must be quite special. Come, both of you. The presentation is about to begin." As Catherine led us away, I caught a glimpse of Diana's thunderstruck expression. The calculated professional connection she'd been pursuing had just transformed into something far more complex and inaccessible. "Thank you for the timely rescue," Harrison murmured to Catherine as we moved through the crowd. 30 years of marriage taught me to recognize your "save me from this conversation" expression, she replied with a wink in my direction. "Besides, I was dying to meet the woman who finally coaxed you out of your self-imposed social hibernation." "Catherine," Harrison warned, though his tone held affection rather than annoyance. "Oh, hush. Pamela deserves to know she's dealing with a confirmed workaholic whose last actual date was sometime during the Obama administration." Catherine squeezed my arm conspiratorially. "Though I must say, if anyone could tempt him back into society, I'm not surprised it's someone with your obvious intelligence and style." We reached the main ballroom, where round tables surrounded a central stage draped with the symphony's insignia. Catherine directed us to a front table where place cards indicated we would be seated with several distinguished-looking couples, board members and major donors, Harrison explained as he held my chair. "Catherine always ensures I'm surrounded by people who can write substantial checks for cardiac research." "Strategically seated," I observed, rather like our encounter with Diana and Philip just now. Harrison's eyes met mine, appreciation for my perception evident. "You noticed that wasn't entirely coincidental. I suspected as much when you mentioned direct confrontation in the proper setting in your text." I arranged my emerald silk carefully as I sat, though I admit I didn't anticipate your ex-wife's involvement. "Catherine and I have been divorced for 12 years, but we remain close friends and allies. She chairs several medical charities I support." He took the seat beside me, his voice lowering. "And she was quite intrigued when I mentioned meeting someone who had captured my interest." The casual acknowledgement that he had discussed me with his ex-wife sent a flutter through my chest that had nothing to do with my cardiac condition. "So this evening has been choreographed from the beginning," I said, trying to process the layers of intention behind what I'd thought was a simple charity event. "Not choreographed," he corrected. "Strategically anticipated. Diana Reynolds has been attempting to manipulate a connection to me through professional channels for months. Learning of your relationship to her created an opportunity to address that situation definitively, while simultaneously enjoying an evening with a woman whose company I've come to value greatly. The honesty of his explanation was oddly reassuring. Harrison wasn't playing games. He was simply accustomed to operating several moves ahead in both his professional and personal life. "And your declaration that I'm your date?" I asked. "Was that also strategic?" His expression softened, the calculated poise giving way to something more vulnerable. "That was entirely sincere, though I should have perhaps discussed the terminology with you first." "I'm not objecting," I clarified, surprising myself with my boldness, merely clarifying. The smile that spread across his face then, genuine, warm, almost boyish in its pleasure, transformed his distinguished features into something far more approachable. "In that case," he said, reaching to take my hand under the cover of the tablecloth, "allow me to formally request the pleasure of considering this our first official date, Pamela Hayes." Before I could respond, the lights dimmed, and Catherine took the stage, welcoming guests to the Symphony's annual cardiac research benefit. I left my hand in Harrison's as she spoke, his thumb tracing small circles on my palm in a gesture that felt startlingly intimate in the darkened ballroom. When the presentation concluded and dinner was served, conversation at our table flowed easily among Atlanta's elite. To my surprise, I found myself not an awkward outsider, but welcomed into discussions about arts funding, medical research, and even global politics. Harrison frequently drew me into conversations, valuing my opinions in a way that made me realize how long it had been since anyone had truly listened to my thoughts on matters beyond family logistics. Between courses, I excused myself to visit the ladies' room. As I was refreshing my lipstick at the marble vanity, Diana appeared beside me, her expression carefully composed. "Quite an evening you're having," she observed, reapplying her own makeup with practiced precision. "Dr. Wells seems quite attentive." "Yes," I agreed simply, offering nothing more. "Mom Hayes," she began, switching to the familiar address she used when attempting to establish connection. "I hope you understand the position this puts us in professionally. My relationship with Meridian is complicated, and having my mother-in-law dating a key industry influencer creates certain expectations." I turned to face her directly. "Diana, let me be very clear. My personal life is not a networking opportunity. Harrison has already established his boundaries regarding your professional interests. I suggest you respect them." She blinked, clearly unused to such direct opposition from me. "I'm just trying to navigate a delicate situation. Surely you can understand that." "What I understand," I replied, maintaining eye contact, "is that for years, my value to this family has been measured by what I could provide. Childcare, financial support, emotional labor. Now that I've developed a connection that exists entirely outside those parameters, your primary concern is how to leverage it for your benefit." Color rose in her cheeks. "That's unfair. We care about you." "Do you?" I interrupted gently. "When was the last time you asked about my recovery, my pain levels, my medication schedule? When was the last time you visited just to see how I was feeling rather than to discuss Harrison?" Her silence was answer enough. "I'm not angry, Diana," I continued, softening my tone. "I'm just finally recognizing patterns I've enabled for too long. Whatever develops between Harrison and me is separate from my relationship with you and Philip. I hope you can respect that distinction." As I turned to leave, Diana's voice stopped me, smaller and more genuine than I'd heard in years. "He really likes you, doesn't he? It's not just, you're older, less polished, not the type of woman you'd expect to see with someone like him?" I supplied, without rancor. She had the grace to look embarrassed. "I didn't mean—" "Yes, you did, and it's all right." I adjusted my emerald earring, remembering Harrison's appreciative gaze earlier. Sometimes the most valuable things aren't obvious at first glance. In medicine, in business, and in relationships. I returned to the table to find Harrison in conversation with the symphony conductor about cardiac rhythms and musical time signatures, a discussion so perfectly aligned with both their interests that I couldn't help but smile. He looked up as I approached, his expression brightening in a way that made my heart flutter in defiance of all cardiac wisdom. As he rose to hold my chair, his hand brushed mine with deliberate intent. "Everything all right?" he murmured. "Better than all right," I replied, realizing with sudden clarity that it was true. "I think I'm finally learning to claim my space, The symphony's performance washed over me in waves of sound and emotion. Tchaikovsky's Romeo and Juliet, with its soaring themes of love battling against all odds. I'd attended concerts with Thomas in this very hall years ago, but tonight the music resonated differently, vibrating with new possibilities I'd long ago filed away as no longer relevant to my life. Harrison sat beside me, his profile noble in the dim light, one hand resting lightly on the armrest between us. Occasionally his fingers would brush mine, not by accident, I was certain, but with deliberate intent. Each small contact sent awareness shimmering through me, a sensation both exhilarating and terrifying at 67. When the final crescendo faded and the hall erupted in applause, he leaned close, his breath warm against my ear. The reception continues in the grand atrium. There will be dancing. Would you care to join, or would that be too taxing after your surgery? My cardiologist cleared me for light exercise, I replied with newfound boldness. I believe a waltz qualifies. His smile, private, intimate, meant only for me, crinkled the corners of his eyes in a way that made him look younger and more approachable. Then may I have the honor of this dance, Pamela Hayes? The grand atrium had been transformed during the concert, its marble floors cleared for dancing, a small orchestra positioned on a raised platform at one end. Crystal chandeliers cast a golden glow over elegantly dressed couples, already beginning to sway to a Strauss waltz. Harrison led me to the edge of the dance floor, his hand warm and secure at the small of my back. It's been some time since I've done this, he confessed. Medical conferences rarely feature ballroom dancing. It's been even longer for me, I admitted. Not since Thomas's retirement party, and that was nearly 20 years ago. Then we shall be rusty together. He turned to face me, one hand extended in formal invitation. Shall we? As his arm slipped around my waist and my hand settled on his shoulder, the years fell away. Our bodies found the rhythm with surprising ease, muscle memory engaging, despite the decades since either of us had properly danced. Harrison led with quiet confidence, guiding me through the swirling couples with the same precision he likely brought to the operating room. You're quite good at this, I observed, as he executed a perfect turn that made my emerald silk flare elegantly. As are you, he countered, another hidden talent to discover. At my age, most talents are well established rather than hidden, I replied. His arm tightened slightly around my waist. I disagree. I suspect you have depths yet unplumbed, Pamela. Capabilities and passions you've set aside for far too long. The directness of his gaze made me glance away, suddenly aware of other couples watching us with undisguised curiosity. We're attracting attention. Good, he said simply. Let them see. See what exactly? A distinguished cardiac surgeon dancing with a beautiful woman who happens to be recovering from groundbreaking cardiac surgery. A medical success story and a personal delight, all in one elegant package. The compliment, delivered with such matter-of-fact confidence, warmed me more than effusive flattery could have. Harrison spoke of my beauty not as something surprising despite my age, but as a self-evident truth requiring no qualification or explanation. As we circled the floor, I caught sight of Philip and Diana standing at the edge of the atrium. My son's expression was troubled, confused, as if witnessing something that challenged his fundamental understanding of the world. Diana's face was more complex, calculation and reevaluation clearly warring with lingering traces of disbelief. Your family seems rather disturbed by our dancing, Harrison noted, following my gaze. Particularly your daughter-in-law. Diana is reassessing her strategic position, I replied. She's realizing that her carefully constructed professional approach has been outmaneuvered by forces she didn't anticipate. Such as a genuine connection between two people that has nothing to do with pharmaceutical endorsements or career advancement. Harrison's eyes crinkled with appreciation. You understand the game board quite clearly. I've been watching from the sidelines for years, I said. Just because I wasn't playing doesn't mean I wasn't learning the rules. The music shifted to a slower tempo, and Harrison drew me slightly closer, still maintaining perfect propriety, but creating a more intimate space between us. And now that you've entered the game, I'm discovering I enjoy it more than I expected, I admitted. His thumb traced small circles where his hand rested at my waist, a gesture hidden from observers but electrifying in its intimacy. And what of your partner in this particular match? He seems exceptionally skilled, I replied, matching his playful tone, though his ultimate strategy remains somewhat mysterious. Harrison chuckled, the sound vibrating through his chest where our bodies nearly touched. Perhaps his strategy is simply to enjoy each move for its own sake, rather than focusing solely on the endgame. The wisdom in this philosophy, so contrary to the calculated maneuvering I'd observed in Diana's professional life and Philip's legal career, struck me with unexpected force. How long had it been since I'd truly lived in the moment, experiencing joy without calculating its cost or anticipating its end? As the dance concluded, Harrison kept hold of my hand, leading me toward the terrace doors. Some fresh air, perhaps? The spring evening is quite mild. The terrace overlooked the city skyline, Atlanta's towers glittering against the night. Only a few other guests had ventured outside, giving us relative privacy as we strolled to the stone balustrade. "You're trembling," Harrison observed, immediately removing his jacket and placing it around my shoulders. The garment carried his scent, subtle cologne, fine wool, and something uniquely him that I couldn't name but found inexplicably comforting. "Just a slight chill," I lied. In truth, I was trembling from the evening's emotional intensity, the public declaration of our connection, the confrontation with Diana, the intimacy of dancing after so many years of solitude. Harrison studied me with the careful assessment of a physician. "Perhaps we should call it an evening. Your recovery is still progressing, and I wouldn't want to overtax you." "No," I said quickly, surprising myself with my vehemence. "I'm fine, truly." His expression softened. "Nevertheless, a physician knows when to end treatment before the patient experiences adverse effects. We've accomplished what we set out to do this evening." "Which was?" I prompted. "To establish certain truths publicly," he replied. "That you and I have a personal connection independent of professional considerations. That your daughter-in-law's attempts to leverage family relationships for business advantage are unwelcome. And most importantly," he paused, his gaze holding mine with unexpected vulnerability, "that a distinguished widow and a workaholic surgeon might find unexpected companionship in their so-called twilight years." The phrase "so-called" wasn't lost on me, his subtle rejection of the notion that our age somehow diminished the significance of what was developing between us. "If we leave now," I ventured, "what happens next?" "Samuel drives you home," he said simply. "I ensure you arrive safely to your door. We say goodnight with the mutual understanding that this evening was the beginning of something, not its conclusion. And tomorrow?" His smile was gentle. "Tomorrow I call to check on my favorite cardiac patient. Perhaps we discuss dinner later in the week, in a less formal setting. We continue learning about each other, one conversation at a time." The simplicity of his proposed path forward, neither rushing nor stalling, just steady progression, calmed my anxieties. This wasn't a reckless plunge into romance, but neither was it a tepid friendship cloaked in plausible deniability. It was honest, direct, and refreshingly clear in its intentions. "I'd like that," I said softly. As we turned to go back inside, Philip appeared at the terrace doors, his expression a mixture of determination and discomfort. Harrison's hand found the small of my back in a subtle gesture of support. "Mom," Philip began awkwardly, "Diana and I are leaving soon. We thought we might drive you home." The offer was transparently strategic, an attempt to separate me from Harrison, to reassert family connection over this new relationship they hadn't anticipated and clearly didn't understand. Before I could respond, Harrison spoke. "That's thoughtful, Mr. Hayes, but unnecessary. Samuel is waiting to drive Pamela home whenever she's ready to leave." "She's my mother," Philip countered, an edge entering his voice. "Surely family takes precedence over whatever this is." The dismissive wave encompassing Harrison and me ignited something long dormant within me, not just anger, but a fierce protective instinct toward this fragile new connection. I wasn't willing to surrender to my son's discomfort. "Philip," I said, my voice steady and clear, "Harrison is my date this evening, and he will see me home. Please give my regards to Diana." My son stared at me as if I'd suddenly started speaking a foreign language. "Mom, be reasonable. You hardly know this man." "I'm 67 years old," I replied calmly. "I believe I'm capable of deciding who escorts me home from a social event. But your heart is functioning quite well, thank you, both literally and figuratively." I softened my tone slightly. "I appreciate your concern, Philip, but I'm not asking for permission or approval. I'm informing you of my decision." As Philip retreated in confused defeat, Harrison's hand squeezed mine gently. "Pamela Hayes," he murmured, "you are remarkable." Under the starlit Atlanta sky, wrapped in his jacket and my newfound assertiveness, I finally began to believe it might be true. Samuel drove in comfortable silence as streetlights cast rhythmic patterns across the Bentley's interior. Harrison sat beside me, not touching, but close enough that I could feel the warmth radiating from him. The evening's emotions, exhilaration, anxiety, defiance, hope, had left me simultaneously exhausted and more alert than I'd felt in years. "Penny for your thoughts," Harrison said softly as we turned onto my quiet suburban street. "I'm not sure they're worth that much," I replied with a small smile. "Just processing everything that happened tonight. Any regrets?" His question held genuine concern rather than insecurity. I considered carefully before answering. "Only that I didn't stand up to Philip sooner. Years sooner, perhaps." Harrison nodded thoughtfully. "Family dynamics calcify over time. Breaking established patterns requires tremendous courage. Is that what I did tonight? Break patterns? Spectacularly so." His smile was warm with approval. "You reclaimed your autonomy in full view of Atlanta society." As Samuel pulled into my driveway, I noticed a light on in my living room that had definitely been off when we left. Harrison noticed my sudden tension. "Is something wrong?" "Someone's in my house," I said quietly. "The light wasn't on when we left." Harrison's expression shifted instantly to protective alert. "Samuel, wait here. Call security if we're not out in 5 minutes." He turned to me. "Do you have any idea who it might be?" "Philip has a key," I replied, "but he was still at the gala when we left." "Let me go first," Harrison insisted as Samuel opened my door. We approached the house cautiously. Through the front window, I caught a glimpse of movement, a figure passing between the living room and kitchen. As we reached the porch, the door suddenly opened, revealing my 17-year-old granddaughter Lily, her eyes widening at the sight of Harrison beside me. "Grandma," she exclaimed. "Oh my God, you look amazing. Is this your doctor? The one Dad and Mom are freaking out about?" Relief flooded me. "Lily, what are you doing here, sweetheart?" She glanced between us with undisguised curiosity. "Mom texted that you were at some fancy gala with a famous doctor. I wanted to see for myself." Her gaze appraised Harrison with the brutal honesty of youth. "Wow, good choice, Grandma." Despite the tension of the moment, I couldn't help laughing. "Lily, this is Dr. Harrison Wells. Harrison, my granddaughter Lily." Harrison extended his hand with the same formal courtesy he'd show any adult. "A pleasure to meet you, Lily. Your grandmother speaks very highly of you." "So you guys are like, dating?" Lily asked bluntly, leading us into the living room where I discovered she'd made herself comfortable with homework spread across my coffee table and a half-eaten sandwich on a plate. "We're getting to know each other," I replied carefully. Lily flopped onto the sofa with teenage grace. "That's code for dating, Grandma. It's cool. You deserve someone nice after being alone forever." The casual assessment of my long widowhood stung slightly, though I knew she meant well. Harrison seated himself in the armchair across from Lily, his posture relaxed but attentive. "How did you get here, Lily?" I asked. "And do your parents know where you are?" She shrugged, the universal teenage gesture of dismissal. I Ubered. "And no, they don't know. They've been texting me crazy stuff all night about you and some doctor, and I got worried they were being weird and controlling like usual." "Weird and controlling?" Harrison echoed, one eyebrow raised. "Yeah, you know. Like how they never visited Grandma in the hospital and then wouldn't pick her up at the airport, but now they're suddenly super interested in her welfare because she knows someone important." Lily made air quotes around welfare with adolescent sarcasm. "I'm 17, not stupid. I can recognize hypocrisy." I glanced at Harrison, whose expression remained neutral, though his eyes held a glint of admiration for my granddaughter's perceptiveness. "While I appreciate your concern, Lily," I said gently, "showing up unannounced isn't the answer. Your parents will be worried." "They're still at that gala thing," she countered. "They won't even notice I'm gone until they get home, and I was planning to Uber back before then." Harrison cleared his throat. "Perhaps Samuel could drive you home when you're ready. Much safer than rideshare services at this hour." Lily's eyes widened. "You have a driver? Like, an actual chauffeur?" "Samuel is more than a driver," Harrison corrected. "But yes, he's waiting outside and would be happy to ensure you reach home safely." "That's actually pretty cool," Lily admitted. "But before I go, can I ask you something, Dr. Wells?" "Of course. Are you serious about my grandma? Because she's been lonely for forever, even though she never complains. And if you're just being nice to her because of her heart thing, or because of whatever weird business stuff Mom is trying to do, that would really suck. The directness of the question, so lacking in the polite circumlocutions of adult conversation, left me momentarily speechless. Harrison, however, didn't hesitate. I'm entirely serious about my interest in your grandmother, he replied with matching directness. Her medical condition brought us together initially, but our connection has nothing to do with her heart thing, as you put it, nor with your mother's professional ambitions. Lily studied him with the intense scrutiny only teenagers can muster. Okay, but just so you know, if you hurt her, I know people who can hack your medical files and give you a fake diagnosis of something embarrassing. Lily! I gasped. Harrison chuckled. A creative threat. Fortunately, I have no intention of giving you cause to implement it. He rose smoothly. Now, I'll ask Samuel to prepare the car while you gather your things. Pamela, may I have a word in private? We stepped onto the front porch, the spring night wrapping around us with cricket songs and the scent of neighboring jasmine. Your granddaughter is remarkable, Harrison observed. Perceptive, protective, and refreshingly direct. She's always been her own person, I agreed, much to her mother's dismay. She clearly adores you. He moved slightly closer, his hand finding mine in the darkness, and shares my concern about your long-standing loneliness. The simple acknowledgement of what I'd kept carefully hidden, the aching solitude of years spent giving without receiving, made my throat tighten unexpectedly. Harrison, about tonight, it was just the beginning, Pamela, he interrupted gently, if you'll allow it to be. In the soft porch light, his face held none of the calculation or strategy that had characterized parts of our evening, just openness, warmth, and something that looked remarkably like hope. I'd like that, I said softly. But my family situation is complicated, as you've seen. Philip and Diana won't simply accept this, whatever this is becoming. They don't need to accept it, he replied. They only need to respect it. And you. A realization struck me suddenly. You knew, didn't you? From the beginning. About Diana's professional pursuit of you, about my family's neglect. You orchestrated tonight deliberately. Harrison didn't deny it. I recognized patterns that concerned me. Your family's reaction to your surgery. Diana's persistent attempts to leverage connections rather than rely on scientific merit. When these patterns intersected, I saw an opportunity to address both simultaneously. By using me as a chess piece? The question held no accusation, merely curiosity. No, he corrected firmly. By offering you the chance to reclaim your position on the board as a queen rather than a pawn. The choice to accept that opportunity was entirely yours. Before I could respond, the front door opened and Lily emerged, backpack slung over one shoulder. Your driver is super nice, Dr. Wells, she announced. He offered to stop for ice cream on the way home, which is basically the fastest way to become my favorite person ever. Harrison smiled. Samuel has excellent judgment about ice cream and many other matters. As he escorted Lily to the waiting Bentley, I watched from the porch, struck by how natural he seemed interacting with my teenage granddaughter, neither condescending nor trying too hard to seem cool, just treating her with the same respectful attention he showed to adults. When he returned, he stood at the bottom of the porch steps, looking up at me with an expression that made my heart flutter in defiance of all cardiac wisdom. I should go, he said, though his tone suggested reluctance. You need rest after an eventful evening. Yes, I agreed, equally reluctant. He ascended 2 steps, reducing but not eliminating the height difference between us. May I call you tomorrow? I'd like that. Another step, bringing us almost eye to eye. And perhaps dinner later this week? Something quieter than tonight's extravaganza? That sounds lovely. His hand reached up to gently touch my cheek, the contact sending warmth spreading through me. Pamela Hayes, you have thoroughly captivated me. Then, with exquisite gentleness, he leaned forward and pressed his lips to mine. A kiss so tender and respectful, yet unmistakably romantic, that it took my breath away. It lasted only moments, but in those moments, 18 years of widowhood seemed to evaporate like morning mist. When he drew back, his eyes searched mine with a question I answered by placing my hand over his, where it still rested against my cheek. Good night, Harrison, I whispered. Thank you for a remarkable evening. The first of many, I hope, he replied, his voice carrying the same slight roughness I felt in my own. As the Bentley disappeared down my quiet street, I remained on the porch, fingers lightly touching my lips where the sensation of his kiss lingered. At 67, with a surgically reinforced heart and decades of putting others' needs before my own, I had somehow stumbled into a second chance at romance. The question now was whether I had the courage to embrace it fully, and weather the family storm that would inevitably follow. 3 weeks after the gala, I sat in my garden, morning sunlight warming my shoulders as I read the latest medical journal Harrison had recommended. My phone chimed with a text notification, Diana requesting a family dinner that evening at their home. The carefully worded message concluded with, "We need to discuss recent developments as a family." I smiled slightly at the corporate phrasing. In the weeks since the symphony event, my relationship with Harrison had evolved with a pace that felt simultaneously measured and exhilarating. Quiet dinners at out-of-the-way restaurants, long conversations on my porch swing, a Sunday drive to the mountains where he'd held my hand as we walked a gentle trail, attentive to my still recovering stamina. Each encounter had deepened our connection while revealing new facets of the distinguished doctor, his dry wit, his passion for classical music, his surprising knowledge of poetry. 2 nights ago, our goodnight kiss had lingered beyond propriety, his arms drawing me close with a hunger that matched my own awakening desire. "Is this too fast?" he'd whispered against my hair. "Too much?" "No," I'd replied, surprised by my own certainty. "It's exactly right." Now, facing Diana's summons, I felt oddly calm. Whatever family discussion she had planned, I was no longer the accommodating mother-in-law, desperate for inclusion at any cost. I texted back, "I'll be there at 7. Is there something specific we need to discuss?" Her reply came quickly. "Just family matters. Philip is concerned about recent changes in your life." Translation: They were staging an intervention about Harrison. I dressed carefully that evening, choosing a sleek pantsuit in a deep teal that Harrison had admired during our last dinner. The woman in the mirror looked remarkably different from the pale, uncertain figure who had landed at Atlanta airport just weeks ago. Color in my cheeks, confidence in my posture, a spark in my eyes that had been absent for years. Philip and Diana's suburban Tudor-style home projected success and stability. Perfect landscaping, luxury vehicles in the circular driveway, tasteful lighting illuminating architectural features. I'd contributed significantly to the down payment, a fact everyone politely avoided mentioning at family gatherings. Lily opened the door before I could ring the bell, her face lighting up. "Grandma, you look amazing." "Thank you, sweetheart." I hugged her, noting the suspicious absence of her younger brother. "Where's Tyler?" "Sleep over at Jason's," she replied, rolling her eyes. "They didn't want him here for the serious family discussion, as if he's not part of the family." Interesting. So this was indeed the intervention I'd suspected. Diana appeared in the foyer, her hostess smile firmly in place. "Pamela, you're right on time. We're having drinks on the patio." The formal use of my first name, rather than Mom Hayes, signaled the evening's serious intent. I followed her through the house I'd visited hundreds of times, suddenly feeling like a guest rather than family. Philip stood at the elaborate outdoor bar, mixing drinks with forced casualness. "Mom, you look well, very youthful." "Thank you," I replied simply. Happiness agrees with me, apparently. An uncomfortable silence followed as Philip handed me a glass of white wine. Diana shot him a look that clearly communicated, "Your turn," prompting him to clear his throat awkwardly. "Mom, we wanted to talk with you about recent developments." "You mean Harrison?" I stated directly, seeing no point in pretending. "Yes." Philip seemed relieved at my directness. "We're concerned about how quickly this relationship is progressing. You barely know him." "Actually, I know him quite well," I corrected gently. "We've spent considerable time together over the past weeks." "That's exactly our point," Diana interjected, professional smile still in place though tension showed around her eyes. "It's all happening so fast, right after your surgery when you're emotionally vulnerable. We're worried he might be taking advantage." Lily, who had been silently observing from a nearby chair, made a disgusted sound. "Oh my God, Mom. Grandma's not some confused old lady being scammed. Dr. Wells is literally famous in the medical world." "Lily, the adults are talking," Diana replied sharply. "Perhaps you should go inside." "No," I said firmly. "Lily stays. This concerns her too, as she's demonstrated more insight into my well-being than either of you lately." Philip looked wounded. Mom, that's not fair. We've always had your best interests at heart. Have you? I asked quietly. When you couldn't spare 30 minutes to pick me up from the airport after cardiac surgery? When you visited me exactly twice in the past month, both times to discuss Harrison rather than my recovery? We've been busy with work commitments. As you've been for years, I interrupted gently. While I rearranged my life repeatedly to accommodate your needs, babysitting on short notice, contributing financially to this very house, being available whenever called upon, but never expecting the same consideration. The blunt assessment hung in the air. Diana recovered first, shifting strategies. Pamela, we value everything you've done for this family. We just don't want to see you hurt by someone who might have complex motivations. You mean someone who might be using me to avoid professional entanglements with Meridian Pharmaceuticals? I asked mildly. Diana flushed. It's exactly what you're implying, I continued. Because you can't imagine Harrison being genuinely interested in me for myself. You assume he must have ulterior motives. It hasn't occurred to you that perhaps he values qualities beyond youth and professional utility. Philip set his drink down harder than necessary. Mom, be reasonable. He's a world-famous physician with incredible influence. I'm what, Philip? I asked when he hesitated. Old? Unaccomplished? Unworthy of genuine interest from someone distinguished? I didn't say that. You didn't have to. It's been implied in every concerned comment, every surprised glance, every attempt to protect me from a relationship you find implausible. Lily moved to sit beside me, her teenage solidarity unexpectedly touching. Grandma has been alone since Grandpa died. Like my entire life. Why can't you just be happy she found someone nice? Diana's expression softened slightly at her daughter's question. Lily, adult relationships are complicated. Sometimes people have agendas that aren't immediately obvious, like trying to use your mother-in-law's new boyfriend for business connections, Lily countered with teenage bluntness. Lily, Diana gasped. What? It's true. I heard you telling Dad that if Grandma would just leverage her relationship properly, it could open doors at Meridian that have been closed for months. Lily's air quotes perfectly mimicked her mother's speech patterns. Philip looked mortified. That was a private conversation. In the kitchen, during breakfast, Lily pointed out. Not exactly classified information. I felt a curious calm despite the uncomfortable revelations. Philip, Diana, I understand your concerns, both personal and professional, but I need to be very clear. My relationship with Harrison is not subject to family approval or strategic planning. It's private, it's genuine, and it's bringing me joy after many years of loneliness. But Mom, I'm not finished, I continued, my voice gentle but firm. For decades, I've structured my life around supporting this family. I've been available whenever needed, generous with my time and resources, uncomplaining when that support wasn't reciprocated. That pattern stops now. Diana's professional composure cracked slightly. What exactly does that mean? It means I'm reclaiming my autonomy, my time, my choices. I met their gazes steadily, including my choice to pursue a relationship with Harrison without justification or apology. And if we're concerned about that choice, Philip asked, his lawyer's instinct for negotiation surfacing, you're entitled to your concerns. You're not entitled to manage my life based on them. I softened my tone. I will always love you both. You're my family. But love doesn't require submission to control disguised as concern. The silence that followed felt weightier than any that had preceded it. Diana stared into her untouched wine. Philip shifted uncomfortably. Lily watched with undisguised admiration. Finally, Philip spoke, his voice strained. We just don't want to lose you, Mom. The vulnerability in his tone, so rare from my achievement-oriented son, touched me deeply. Oh, Philip, you're not losing me. You're just meeting a version of me you haven't had to deal with before. The version that stands up for herself, Lily supplied helpfully. Precisely. I reached for Philip's hand. I've spent 18 years defining myself as Thomas's widow, your mother, the children's grandmother. I'm discovering there's more to me than those roles, and it's terrifying and exhilarating in equal measure. Something in my words seemed to reach Diana, whose carefully maintained facade softened into something more genuine. I never really considered how lonely you must have been, she admitted quietly. All these years, I buried it beneath busyness, I acknowledged. Being needed by all of you gave purpose to my days. But Harrison has reminded me that I'm not just a supporting character in other people's stories. I deserve a narrative of my own. And Dr. Wells is part of that narrative now? Diana asked, professional assessment clearly running beneath the personal question. Yes, I stated simply, though not in the way that might benefit Meridian Pharmaceuticals. Diana had the grace to look embarrassed. About that, we don't need to discuss it further, I interrupted gently. Your professional ambitions are your concern. My relationship with Harrison is mine. Those boundaries need to be respected moving forward. As if summoned by our conversation, my phone chimed with Harrison's distinctive tone. I glanced at the screen to see his message. Thinking of you this evening. Call when you're free? A smile touched my lips involuntarily, bringing curious looks from my family. Him? Philip asked. Yes. I made no move to hide the screen or apologize for the interruption. Lily broke the tension with teenage pragmatism. So are we actually having dinner, or was this just scheduled for the intervention? Because I'm starving. Diana sighed, momentarily abandoned her perfect hostess persona. There's lasagna keeping warm in the oven. I suppose we should eat. As we moved inside, Philip hung back, touching my arm to delay me. Mom, I need to ask, are you happy? Really happy? The question, asked without agenda or judgment for perhaps the first time in years, deserved complete honesty. Yes, I said simply. For the first time since your father died, I remember what it feels like to be fully alive, to be seen for myself, not just for what I can provide. His expression shifted through several emotions before settling on something resembling acceptance. Then I guess I need to get used to having Dr. Harrison Wells at family dinners. That would be nice, I replied, though not required. Harrison and I are creating our own path, which may or may not always intersect with family obligations. That's going to take some getting used to, he admitted. For all of us, I agreed. Change usually does. Later that evening, as Samuel drove me home, I called Harrison as promised. His voice, warm and intimate through the phone, created an immediate connection, despite the physical distance. How was the family dinner? He asked. Illuminating, I replied. They staged a concerned intervention about us. He chuckled, the sound sending pleasant shivers through me. And how did that go for them? Not as planned, I admitted, though I think we reached a new understanding, or at least the beginning of one. I'm proud of you, he said softly. Standing your ground couldn't have been easy after so many years of accommodation. Surprisingly, it was easier than expected. I watched familiar streets pass outside the Bentley's window. Once I became clear about my own worth, the rest followed naturally. Your worth has never been in question, Harrison replied. At least not to me. As Samuel pulled into my driveway, I noticed a warm glow coming from my porch, not the automatic security light, but the soft illumination of candles, dozens of them, arranged along the railings and steps, creating a pathway to my door where a tall figure waited. Harrison? I gasped into the phone. Are you at my house? I may have prepared a small surprise, he admitted. I thought you might need something special after facing the family tribunal. Samuel opened my door with a conspiratorial smile. Dr. Wells arranged everything while you were out, Mrs. Hayes. The candles are LED, no fire hazard. I approached my transformed porch in wonder, seeing Harrison waiting with an expression of such tender anticipation that my heart, both literally and figuratively stronger than it had been in years, swelled with emotion. What is all this? I asked as I reached him. A celebration, he replied, taking both my hands in his, of courage, of new beginnings, of a remarkable woman who is finally claiming her rightful place in her own life story. As he drew me into an embrace that felt like coming home to a place I'd never been before, I realized that my surgical journey had healed far more than just my physical heart. It had cracked open decades of careful containment, allowing me to step into a life richer and more authentic than I'd believed possible at 67. The diagnosis that had terrified me had become, unexpectedly, the prescription for my rebirth. Pamela's journey from neglected mother-in-law to empowered woman comes full circle as she finally claims her right to happiness on her own terms. Thank you for following this story of late-life transformation, romance, and the courage to start anew when society expects you to fade into the background. If you've enjoyed this journey of heart, both literal and metaphorical, please subscribe, activate notifications, and share your thoughts in the comments below.